Hi students, I wanted to talk to you today about revising the documentary response essay. So I'm going to go over the things that came up the most and or the things you can do that would get you the most points back. All right, so let's cover those. So the introduction, you may remember I talked about in the writer's workshop for this paper, um, how to build the introduction for this type of paper. And I like to talk about doing this essay development in layers. English lasagna is my term, right? So you've got to employ that for this introduction because there are different elements that you need that are really key to having a clear introduction for this type of essay, right? So I'm going to break it down and talk about each of those layers that really need to be in place. So you can't assume that the reader of your paper has seen the film. So I know that, yes, technically I am the reader of your paper, but that your professor is a stand-in, really, in any case, for a reasonably intelligent person who may not have awareness about the topic you're writing about. So a reasonably intelligent person who hasn't seen the film in this case, right? So you've got to, number one, first in your intro, give a summary of the film. In that summary, you have got to include the full title of the film and the director's full name. Okay, so because that sets the stage, right? If you just start talking about, in the film, what film would that be, right? I mean, the reader's like, what are you talking about, right? So whichever film that I'll say, in the film, the address, and give the director's name, and then you give a summary. You give what that film was about, so the reader has some context for it. Guideline is to take approximately 2 to 3 sentences to do that. Could it be 4? Yeah, absolutely. This is not, math in that it doesn't have to be the exact number or that's wrong, right? But this is a good guideline. So if you only had one sentence to describe the film, that wouldn't be enough, right? 10 is too long, honestly. If you're spending the entire introduction still talking about the film as far as a summary, that's too much, all right? So you're just giving an overview, especially as it pertains to the points that you are going to be working with in the film, all right? So summarize the film. You must include the title of the film. You must include the director's full name. All right. Next layer, explain the issue, the one that you're going to be working with. So let me back up. So explain the issue in the film that you will be dealing with. So any of these films have more than one issue, but you are going to make a connection between the summary of the film and the issue that you will address in your film. And I don't mean to do it this way. Nobody did this that I recall, but I just want to be clear in my instructions. I don't want you to say, and now the issue I will be working with is there something, no. I mean, right? You're smoothly transitioning from the giving the summary of the film to the explaining the issue. So I'm trying to pick one that I don't think anyone worked on yet. I don't know. So I'll just pick eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Let's see. I'll pick the address since that was one of the later ones. It was a feel good one, right? So in the address, I can't remember the director's name. In the address, directed by so and so. Oh gosh, that's not working for me. For some reason that one is, I picked that one and then it wasn't in my head. All right, fine. I'll pick so in Educating Rita, directed by, I think it was Lewis Gilbert, right? Directed by Lewis Gilbert, a 26-year-old hairdresser decides to go back to school to continue her education at an open university program, and in the process of working towards her dream of a higher education, she begins also the process of discovering herself or something like that, right? I mean, this is just it. This is literally off the top of my head. So, all right, so you would give a summary of the film in approximately 2 to 3 sentences, and then you segue into the issue that you want to work with. So say in that case, one issue could be I don't know why I've just been thinking a lot. My brain is sort of all over the place. So whatever the issue is. I'm sorry that I'm not pulling it out. You want to segue into that. You're going to focus on the issue that you would like to cover in your paper, right? So in about 2 to 3 sentences, you'll explain that dynamic, and then the next part is that you're explaining the controversy, not the controversy to the film, because that's going to be tough, right? I mean, wow, who could really disagree with this film, The Address, or something? I mean, no, that's going to be that, but that's why you need a clear issue that you're working with, like one clear issue and then one clear idea. So you're explaining the issue that you'll be working on, which could be maybe that's not the one for me to choose. At any rate, explain the issue that you want to work with, and then you've got to explain the controversy, both sides, how both sides, why would people argue about this? Why do people feel differently about it? Explain both sides neutrally so that the reader understands the issue and they understand that there are two different sides to the issue, right? And then you segue for that right into explaining your focused idea about the issue. That's where I start saying turn the car. So first you're explaining it neutrally so the reader has a good understanding of both sides of the issue. Then you do, turning the car to your idea about the issue. Now you get into what is my idea about the issue? That has to come before your thesis. So your thesis should not be a shock to the reader, like, whoa, didn't see that one coming. No, right? That's confusing, right? So you explain the idea in your thesis, and then you say it very specifically in your thesis. The thesis in this case must have the title of the film in it. If you don't have the title of the film, it starts getting away from you. It's confusing to the reader. This is a documentary response, so the main focus has to be of the film. If you write about the issue that you're dealing with, but not the film as much itself, or you use evidence in the film, but you're not centered on the film, it can become what's called a parallel essay. Whereas here's the film, here's what you're writing about. There's a connection there, but they're not. You don't want to just write about, budget cuts in schools, right, for 180 days, but you're not really centered on the film, if that makes sense, right? So you've got to something like. I'll try to think of that one. That was the first. All right, I'll do this one. All right, this popped into my head. I don't. People wrote about this film, but they didn't take on this issue that I recall. So something like, let's say 180 Days. In 180 Days, an American high school, directed by, off the top of my head, Jackie Jones, right? A PBS film that is a PBS film that explores the issues concerning a high school in Washington, D.C., which is undergoing educational reform, and you explain a little bit more about that, right? And then I would say part of this reform was part of the federal program called Race to the Top, in which student success focused heavily on standardized testing, and to ensure that all students had an equitable access to education. And the film, grapples with how to incorporate the needs of the students, and how to help them to be successful both on the test and in their courses, right? And the issue, right? Standardized testing is the one I choose. I could have chosen truancy. I could have chosen a host of other issues. But I guess, this is what popped into my head right now, was to choose standardized testing. All right, so explaining the controversy. Both sides. People have different views on standardized testing, right? So then I would explain both sides. While some argue that standardized testing is an equity measure, ensuring that all students across the United States are given equal access to education, rather than having each individual school district um, assessing the students without a federal standard, uh, and leaving some students perhaps falling behind on their academics, right? Um, however, then use plenty other. However, others argue that um, that standardized testing is problematic because it does not assess the breadth of knowledge that students have about the topic, and can be very stressful for students who have test anxiety, or even learning disabilities, right? Something like that. And then I would explain my idea about it, whichever way I'm going to go on that, which, so that's what I mean though. But that's, so you would give the summary of the film, explain the issue, connect that smoothly to whatever issue you want to talk about. Then you go into explaining both sides neutrally, right? And then you go into explaining your idea about it. So I could pick, really either one, but um, whatever it is, right? So, but then so I'll just pick one. So while standardized testing, um, while standardized testing, yeah, I just can't do it today. I'm sorry. I'll leave that you to write your own paper, right? So, but at any rate, you explain both sides. You start explaining, well, yes, that's a good point that they have. Here's my idea about it, and here's where I'm going with this, right? And then you give your thesis. So 180 Days in an American High School shows um, the the great difficulties for um, for student success that is based primarily on standardized testing. There you go. All right. Sometimes I have to speak the thesis first, right? So I might in the transition I would explain that while yes this issue was designed as an equity issue, as a method of providing better education for all American students. However, and then explain why I'm arguing that it is problematic in this way, and then you have your thesis. The title of the film must be in the thesis. So think about, if it went awry for you, think about, what issue do I want to cover? So there shouldn't be like lots and lots of issues swimming around fighting for dominance or something in your intro, right? That's super confusing for the reader. I shouldn't be reading out, here's another issue, and then there's another one, right? It needs to be cohesive in that it all flows, right? Summary, explain the issue, explain the controversy, explain your idea, flows right into the thesis, right? So if you're missing a layer, if there's some part of this that you just forgot to do, then you could easily just put that in place, okay? All right, so that's probably enough about the intro, I think. And the thesis, again, we just talked about that. Topic plus idea. It has to be a clear, focused idea. One way to think of it is, what am I advising? What do I want to happen here? What exactly? It has to be very focused, right? So think of your issue first and think, what do I think about it? What do I want to happen? What am I advising? It has to have the title of the film in the thesis. That's what helps you to keep that tight focus on the film. It helps the reader to keep a tight focus on the film. Okay, let's move on then to transition words and phrases. We have not let those go. We're never letting them go because they're part of essay structure. So at this point, you should be really acing essay structure. Sometimes I think we just get to this point in the semester and we're tired and overwhelmed, to be, just real, right? So, but we can't let these things fall by the wayside. They're small words, but they transition the reader into your next point very smoothly. So if it's just all kind of a jumble, honestly, it's confusing for the reader. They want to smoothly, transition into your first point, smoothly transition into your second point, right? So it might be easy to forget about them, but we don't want to forget about them, right? So if you want to do, I mean, you can do the same ones every time, it would be fine. Honestly, it's just clear and focused, right? So first, second, finally is the ones I use consistently in the writer's workshop. You can use them every time, right? You could say first to begin or whatever, something like that. And then you could say in addition, next, moreover, furthermore, whatever you choose, right? But do put them in, right? So there should be a transition word and phrase. It also keeps you on track as a writer to remember, as an essay writer, to remember to add the topic sentence, because it can be, easy to forget about that. But if you have your formula for success, it's a formula for success, then you'll have, okay, transition word and phrase, topic sentence, right? So don't forget about them. If you have, just put them back in. The good news is they're easy to put back in if you did forget. All right, so next, I just thought of something I wanted to go over, so I'm gonna okay. All right, sorry about that. Just forgot one thing I wanted to cover. Okay, so topic sentences. So these are, as I like to say, the building blocks of essays. They are the building blocks of essays. Without topic sentence, you really don't have an essay. You've got a document, you've got a response perhaps, but you do not have an essay. So topic sentences build the essay. So you have got to know, before you start writing the paper, what is my big idea? What are my 3 clear reasons that support that idea? That's why I asked you that in the topic proposal, right? Or what are 3 smaller aspects of this idea? It cannot be a fact. Topic sentences are not facts, they're ideas. So if you don't know that when you start writing the paper, you could be headed for a big problem, right? So this is why I advise doing something like this. If you have learned previously about how to do a formal outline, then you should do that, because it can help one to get organized, with the Roman numerals and all that. So that's cool. But if you don't want to do that, or that stresses you out or whatever, you still need what I like to call a plan of attack. It takes less than 5 minutes to make a plan of attack. It will save you stress. It will save you time. It will save you heartache. It will save you points. All right. So plan of attack. What's my idea? What's the issue in this case? Topic, issue/topic. And what is my idea? What am I advising? So in this case, if I was writing about 180 days in an American high school, and I decided to focus on standardized testing, right? That was my issue. I would just write that down. I would write, okay, I'm going to focus on standardized testing. What is my idea about that? I'd have to think about it, right? I couldn't even do it off the top of my head. Let's say that you could say that it's a positive thing, that actually it does provide more equity. It makes sure that whether you live in Washington, D.C., you live in Fairfield, California, you live in, I don't know, Little Rock, Arkansas, wherever it is, you get the same education. You're not left behind just because your school district is left behind in some way, right? I mean, so you could argue for that this is overall, it has its critics, and you can address that in the essay, but that it is overall an equity measure, right? I mean, something like that. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you got to know where you're going. All right, and then you need 3 reasons that you think that, right? 3 reasons that you are arguing for whatever you are arguing for, right? So let's take the opposite view. Let's say I still picked standardized testing, but I decided that I said yes, that while it is a measure toward a more equal education for all students in the United States, that there are several problems associated with it that disrupt student learning. There you go. I'm arguing that it can disrupt student learning, and then I might focus on 3 aspects of where or how it could disrupt student learning, which could be focusing on students with, say, learning disabilities. I could focus on one way that it disrupts student learning is for those who have test anxiety. And that finally, perhaps it does not measure a student's true knowledge of the topic. May not, talk about that in a minute, absolute phrasing. May not measure students' knowledge of topic. Okay, that was more like 3 minutes, 2 minutes. I didn't time it. But anyway, it was way less than 5 minutes. I have a plan of attack. I'm ready to go, right? But if you just start diving into the paper and swimming around, so to speak, it will read like you just dived in and started swimming around and you're just grasping for ideas. Here's one. I think there's one over there. I'm going to kind of work that in too. Don't do that to yourself. It's super stressful for anyone to write that way, right? This is where you end up staying up all night, stressed out, in tears, whatever, right? Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to anyone else that is reading it, right? Because it can read that way. So instead, make a plan of attack. What's the issue? What's my idea about it? What are 3 reasons I feel that way? Or what are 3 aspects of it? There you go. Got a plan of attack, right? So that is going to help you to build your thesis. It will help you to build your topic sentences. You've got to know what they are before you start writing the paper. Don't expect them to just sort of show up, right? So you've got to think about them first, really. All right, so that doesn't mean that if you can think of 2 and you can't think of the other one, yes, you can start working on the other 2. But don't just oh Lord help us, it's midnight, I gotta think of something, right? No, it's just take 2 minutes and make a plan of attack. All right, topic sentences, they have to support your thesis. So if they're a different point, if they're supporting the opposition, that can't be your topic sentence, right? I'll talk about the opposition in a little bit, but your topic sentence must support your thesis, right? It cannot go against your thesis. That's super confusing, right? And it's just not logical, right? So the other thing, the topic sentence has to be an idea, not a fact, right? So it can't be that the topic sentence in this case could not be first. Some students don't do well on tests. Okay, well, that's a fact, right? We can verify that some students don't do well on tests, right? That's not an idea. So again, you've got to have a clear idea, right? If it's a fact, we can go verify it, right? So you need to have an idea. It also needs to connect to the film, right? So let's go back again to my plan of attack here. So if we had the thesis that the film 180 Days in American High School shows that the problems associated with standardized testing, that what did I say before? That disrupts student learning in several key ways. There you go. Something like that. I said it differently the first time, probably better. But I'm on the wrong page. That didn't help. All right. So I could say first, as shown in the film 180 Days in American High School, some students may have learning disabilities that make it particularly difficult that make it particularly difficult for them to succeed on standardized testing, right? And so you could then explain that, look for evidence in the film. If you're doing the research aspect, you could get evidence from research, right? Then you could do the same thing with test anxiety, the same thing with, finally, the film shows that standardized testing may not accurately measure a student's knowledge of the topic, something like that. Notice I said may not. I'm going to talk about absolute phrasing later on. Not does not. It's not a fact. It's an idea, right? So we cannot do this absolute phrasing where we know everything about everything. There's no possibility that it's the other way around. No. So just avoid absolute phrasing, may not. All right, fine. Very good. All right, so now we've got the topic sentences. So, one major idea per paragraph, right? So we don't need 2 topic sentences in the same paragraph ever. So 1 per paragraph, think about that. Primary support. So primary support is what I tend to call the explanation. So in your paragraph, so here's your paragraph, right? Here's your topic sentence, your transition word and your topic sentence. first layer normally, right? So yes, technically a topic sentence can be other places in the paragraph. To be honest with you, if you're kind of struggling with topic sentences, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go all avant-garde here. Seriously, have it as the first sentence. It's clear that way. You know it's clear that way, and then you can check it off, and then you can kind of develop it as you go. And if you get once you get really like this is just second nature, yeah, you can mix it up a little bit perhaps, but this is essay writing. There's a structure to it. So topic sentence. The next you explain the topic sentence, right? So the reader does not necessarily know what you know. They have not necessarily thought about the topic as you have. They may not have seen the film, right? So you have your topic sentence, then you explain your topic sentence. Let's go with the example I just gave. That finally the film shows that standardized testing may not measure a student's true knowledge of the topic, right? And so I need to explain that. The reader of your paper might be like, well, why wouldn't it? I mean, there's the test. It's on what they're learning. Like, why wouldn't it? Got to put yourself, awareness of audience. You have to put yourself in their place of not necessarily knowing about that, or they haven't thought of it that way. You need to explain your topic sentence in about 2 to 3 sentences. So explain why that's the case. Explain how that's the case, right? Not an example yet, in your own words. You're going to explain about 2 to 3 sentences. Could it be 4? Sure. But take at least 2 to 3 and explain it, right? That is also called primary support, okay? So it's called primary support, where you explain your topic sentence. Next, we need the specific example, which is also called secondary support. Now, this is the evidence. This is the specific quote from the film. You must quote from the film. You cannot write this paper without quoting from the film. Well, I guess you can, but it won't be satisfactory, right? So you give your evidence. Your evidence is a specific illustration of this point. Sometimes we're thinking about maybe several different aspects of this, and we give evidence that doesn't clearly or directly support that point. That's a huge problem, right? So in this case, you would give an example from the film or a quote from the film about how standardized testing may not truly measure a student's knowledge of the topic, right? And you would explain that, and then you would give evidence of that. If you are doing the research aspect and you have research that supports that exact point, then include that. But you've got to have, it's got to be a direct line here. So and then it is very good to have some analysis, which is, again, and then this is, so I would say this is another 2 to 3 sentences, that's another 2 to 3 sentences, your focused thoughts about this issue on the topic sentence. So it's like you're building a wall with bricks here, and every layer is another brick to build that wall, right? It shouldn't be where you have the topic sentence, and then that leads you to a different idea, which leads you to another idea, which leads you to another idea. No, that is super confusing. Don't do that to yourself or the reader, right? So you've got, if your topic sentence is about standardized testing, not measuring, possibly not measuring a student's true knowledge of the topic, then the whole paragraph has to be about that. That should not then lead you to some other different reason, right? So sometimes I think we're just thinking about a lot of different aspects of this, and then we think about another point about that has nothing to do with that particular topic sentence. It has to do with the topic, but not that topic sentence. So it shouldn't be, oh, and here's another idea, and here's another idea, and here's another idea. No. It's got to be the same idea. Every single brick has to be built into this same wall, right? So we can't include bricks from different walls here, right? So, for example, I can remember years ago when Oprah had her regular show, and she had her book club, and she had Toni Morrison on, and I think it was Song of Solomon was the book that was being discussed. A good book if you get a chance to read. But at any rate, she would have some of the readers on that read the book, and they were discussing it, and they got to meet Ms. Morrison. And one of the readers that had read the book and was discussing it on the show said, "Oh, I love this book so much, I had to read every word." And Toni Morrison said, "And I had to write every word." And I absolutely loved that statement because it was like every word counts. Every sentence counts. There are no empty sentences that you're just kind of throwing in just cuz, right? They all are like bricks in the wall. They all build your point, right? They all add something necessary to clarifying your point, making it more clear, helping the reader to see it more clearly, convincing the reader more clearly, all right? So every single one is important, but it has to be unified. It has to be cohesive. So if I said that you had more than one idea in the paragraph, what I try to do sometimes to point that out, not in a punitive or I hope, or it's not my intent to be punitive or critical, but it's my intent to just help you to see it so that you can work on this. So for example, if I put, here's idea number 1, here's idea number 2, here's idea number 3, if there are several different ideas in the paragraph, that is to help you separate it out. Each of those ideas should have their own paragraph, okay? So that's kind of like if you've gotten a necklace and you've gotten it all twisted around, which happens, and you're trying to straighten it out, you kind of have to separate the strands. That's what can happen sometimes. So the reason I've done that is just to help you to see where the different ideas are so that you can separate it out and decide to, give each of those ideas a paragraph. If there are too many ideas to put in the essay, then some of them will clearly have to go, right? And you get to pick what is really your supporting your thesis. All right, very good. So let's go back. So we talked about topic sentences, primary support, even talked about secondary support. I'm going to flip and do that over here. So we already talked about secondary support evidence. And I'm going to just really, while I'm on this topic of the evidence, you must cite from the film. You cannot do this paper without citing from the film. That is not the extra credit part. The extra credit part is that if you have done further research and other articles which you are incorporating, I can talk about that. But it is a requirement of writing a documentary response essay to quote from the film, give evidence from the film, and so you must cite that. You have every time, you guys did like the homework exercise from the YouTube video, right? So every time that you give any specific information from the film, you have to cite it. So you're citing that parenthetically, right? And then you must have a work cited at the end, even if the only citation is the film. That's fine. That's all you need, but you need it, okay? All right, so just don't forget about that. All right, paragraph development, we talked about that. Opposition. Okay, so number 1, you have to include in your intro, it should say what the main idea of the opposition you will be addressing has to be a main objection. It can't be something that like who would possibly have that view, right? So it has to be a clear, opposition, not to the film, but to your idea, right? So you must address that in your intro, and you must address that in the body of your essay, but you can't support them, right? You've got to explain their view, right? And then say something like, while some argue that, and give what their point is, right? Then you want to counter that. So you want to explain why, while that is a valid concern, that yours takes some sort of precedence for some reason that you will explain, or you could even explain them how they could fix their problem. You're addressing their concern very specifically. Either way, you need evidence. You must have evidence, right, for countering it. All right, so you're not supporting them. You're not just turning the car over to them and say, okay, your turn, you drive. Okay, and now a word from our opposition, right? No. You've got to be in control. You're the driver of the car. You're not letting the passengers drive. No. But you do need to take what they're saying into consideration. You need to show that you understand there are different ways of seeing this idea, and that you are a good critical thinker, right? So you understand both sides and you are seeking to address their concerns. So if it supports your existing topic sentence, it can go in its own body paragraph, and you would say, on that topic. Okay, so let's go back. I'm going to go back again to the same example, the seeking consistent, which is, let's go back to this. Let's say this was my topic sentence here, that finally the film shows that standardized testing may not show a student's true knowledge of the topic, right? And of the subject, sorry. And so then I would explain that. I would give my evidence, and then I would bring up a counterpoint that, while some argue that, what would be the counter? While some argue that in fact this is that this standardized testing, to have the same questions and the same test for every student, does in fact measure the same knowledge across the board about each for each student about the same subject, because students have such a wide variety of ways of demonstrating their knowledge. This is not often an across-the-board assessment that really shows each student's understanding of the topic. For example, some students may not do well in multiple choice by having to decide which of the answers is correct, but given the chance to have a short answer question in which they are able to really explain their knowledge about that subject and give examples, may do very well. And then I would give some evidence of that from film or research. But if you see what I'm saying, that I treat it as serious, their concern is serious, and I seek to address that or show why mine has, has kind of a higher position in some way. But I'm not, here's the other thing though, that I do treat it seriously, the opposition. We're just not supporting them. So I want to make another point about that. You do need to counter with evidence. You need to give the evidence, even if you already have evidence to support your topic sentence in the paragraph. And if you're addressing the opposition in the same paragraph, still on that same area of the topic sentence, you need evidence again to address the opposition. But here's the other thing. We must maintain a spirit of goodwill towards the opposition. So I think sometimes we just get really passionate about these issues, and sometimes we let go of our critical thinking skills, really. And we just start name calling and things like that. Don't do that. That is just, it is not good critical thinking. It is zero critical thinking, honestly. It's a bunch of nonsense, and we're not here to write nonsense, right? And it is just, it's really rather unethical. So you're not going to call people names in your paper, seriously. That is an ad hominem attack, which is a logical fallacy, an ad hominem fallacy in which you attack someone's character instead of attacking the problem. And it doesn't matter if this person is a public figure. It doesn't matter if they're in a position of authority or whatever, right? That is not good critical thinking. What the reader sees is that the reader can think that you do not clearly understand the issue and that you cannot grasp the complexity of it. So you have to resort to schoolyard bully techniques of name calling, right? And that just reduces your whole argument down to rubbish, really. So nobody's going to be convinced by that, really. But if you instead address the complexity of the issue, clearly look that there are two views, and one is not like, horrid and one is correct, right? We don't live in that sort of black and white existence, right? We live in a complex world, right, with complex issues. And as a college student, you are discussing these complex issues, right? You have to look at the complexity of the issue, right? So we are not here to be schoolyard bullies. We are not here to, just be nonsensical, right? So if you address the situation seriously and with the complexity, without name calling and all that sort of thing, that the reader they may be neutral on the subject, not really aware of the issue, and they may be convinced to your point of view. They might be actually had thought of it a different way, had a different idea about it, but could be convinced. I have changed my mind about all sorts of things over the years, often by something I've read, So we have the power to change folks' minds, and we have the power to change our own minds, right? But we must stay away from illogical rants, right? This is not an angry rant. That is not that format. If statements that you make in your paper sound like they would be great for a bumper sticker, it's probably not phrased very well for the paper, right? So just kind of rethink. So if I said that something was a logical fallacy, you were able to watch that video on logical fallacies, right? And we all did an exercise on that. So you want to make sure that usually people do those by accident. So you just want to regroup and realize that's not the way to go, right? All right, so you must maintain a spirit of goodwill toward the opposition, all right? So there you go. So there's that. All right, so then, yes, we want to avoid logical fallacy. So ad hominem is a one to avoid where you're attacking a person's character, right? So attack the problem, but don't attack the people. That's another way to remember it. Attack the problem, don't attack the people. Another one can be sort of like a slippery slope argument where it's like, if we don't do XYZ, like all these horrible things are going to happen, like, and we're not looking at the complexity of the issue that might happen, but there are other things that might happen too, and it's a complex issue, right? So at any rate, so if I said there was a logical fallacy, just, address that. All right, so we must have historical accuracy. So we must, this is about complexity normally again. So we want to avoid making sort of sweeping generalizations, right? So as an example of that, I'm going to go to the Educating Rita film. So yes, I know that it came out in the 1980s. I saw it when it came out, folks. I was a college student at that time, so saw it in the theater. Yes, I did. So I can tell you that this is third wave feminism was in the 1960s and 70s. That wasn't first or second wave either. That was like Gloria Steinem and, like a lot of movement toward the Equal Rights Amendment that wasn't passed at the time. They're looking at still maybe being able to do that. But there was a lot going on in the 60s and 70s regarding this, right? By the 1980s, many of us took it for granted. Maybe we shouldn't have, but many of us took it for granted. I don't know anyone that was thinking that women should not go to college in the 1980s. I went to college in the 1980s, so I can tell you that was not the prevalent thinking at the time, right? So we need to be really careful with historical accuracy. We need to be careful about making sweeping generalizations. If you wanted to turn this into a research project and you were going to research feminism in the 1980s, fine, right? Access to higher education in the 1980s, fine. Get your evidence, but avoid the absolute phrasing and avoid the absolute phrasing and avoid sweeping generalizations, and make sure what you're saying is actually accurate. I will say, though, that of course there are more traditional pockets. Personally, I think the author in that case, who is the author of the play, the screenwriter, and the author of the playwright, right, Willie Russell. I think that he, who grew up in what was termed working class, right, that he was making a commentary on class distinctions personally. So if you look at in the beginning of that particular film, that Rita/Susan, when she's saying that she uses a swear word and Frank doesn't even notice, right? And she said she's apologizing, and he said, oh, okay, like whatever. And she says, she makes this comment about, oh, educated people don't care about things like that, do they? And then she said, it's the aristocracy that swears more than anyone, you know? And it's like, and all this, and then she gives examples of what she thinks about that. Like, so, but I think that, I mean, can you picture Dr. Frank Bryant, you know, really, you know, not wanting women to be at the university? I can't. I mean, so I think he's looking at some folks that have this particular life experience that were perhaps held to this more traditional view of things, right? And so, yes, in the last 30 years, women have made a great deal of progress, but it might be something like, despite the inroads made toward, you know, women's higher education in the 1980s, still, you know, whatever it was, still there's this issue, right, or something like that. But you've got to be historically accurate, right? So, and that goes with anything too. We also don't. I'm going to jump right into this. Avoid vague generalities, sweeping generalizations, and absolute phrasing. So, you want to avoid absolute phrasing, meaning that this is the way that it is, or this is the way that it will be. We don't know. It's not the same for every person, right? So, for example, thinking about 180 days in an American high school, right? We shouldn't say, well, some students in the film, no, that would not be absolute phrasing, but absolute phrasing would be, students in the film didn't have a good home life. Really? That's a sweeping generalization. That is an absolute phrasing that needs to be avoided. Some students in the film may not have, and some have very good home lives. I think of Tiara, the student Tiara, with her mother, who is like her champion, and oh my gosh, who wouldn't want her mother for a mother? I mean, her mother was awesome. She had a wonderful, stable home life, right? I mean, so, like, we can't make these sweeping generalizations about others or time periods or anything like that. We have to deal with the complexity of the issue, right? So we just need to phrase it in a way that allows people to be individuals, right? Allows the complexity of the issue to be shown, all right, and dealt with. So we want to avoid vague generalities. So vague generalities are just kind of like broad statements that, again, do not deal with the complexity of the issue. Something like, let's see. Let's deal with the address. So by memorizing the Gettysburg Address, you know, the students can feel better about themselves and achieve perfect and make all their dreams come true. That's a vague generality. I mean, so instead deal with the specific issue, like, is it building their confidence? Is it, you know, enhancing their speech? Is it, but not just, you know, make all their dreams come true. It sounds nice-ish, but it's just vague, right? I mean, so you want to avoid that. And I know the intention is good, right? But you want to deal with the complexity of the issue and stay focused, right? So sweeping generalizations can be, you know, positive, negative, but we still want to avoid them, right? In our papers, you can have them in your real life. It's okay, but not in the paper. All right, very good. So we're going to check that one off. Oh, the other thing is an absolute phrasing. You want to avoid this. No will, right? Could, can, that sort of thing, because we don't know. If students do not have standardized testing, they will achieve more academic goals. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, maybe some will, maybe some won't, right? We have to allow for individual variance. And so we're going to say could, right? You could even say could likely, but we have to allow the possibility that this doesn't apply to everyone. All right, so very good. All right, conclusion, really important again, as always, no new information. So sometimes in a paper of this nature, again, I think sometimes we're writing and we're tired, we're overwhelmed, and we think of something else, and we don't realize, we do it without realizing that we're putting a new idea in the conclusion. So it's really important to not have new points or new ideas in your conclusion. It's also really important to not disagree with your thesis. It's rather disheartening to have a thesis be, reading through and having the topic sentences, maybe that's supported very well, and you get to the conclusion, and all of a sudden the writer seems to disagree with their own thesis. Right? And so instead of, if we were arguing, for example, when I was talking about against standardized testing, and then we get to the end and then we say, however, I did standardized tests throughout my schooling, and actually I did really well on them. I thought they were pretty good. No, save that for another paper, right? But you've got to support your thesis. If you don't believe in your thesis, like, why should the reader, right? So be consistent. One way to check for that, because again, it's human, especially when you're tired and overwhelmed. It's certainly human, but we've just got to look for these things, right? So read over your whole paper, and then also before you turn it in, because you can catch things, of course, but then also read over your intro and then read immediately after it your conclusion. Make sure they match so that it's like a matched bookend set, right? And there aren't new ideas in the conclusion. Okay, so make sure of that. You must touch back on your thesis. You must touch back on the film. The film, keep the tight focus. It's all about the film, right? Keep a tight focus on the film. Actually give the name of the film again, full name of the film. Keep it centered on the film. This will not likely be the last time that you are writing about a film. It's the same exercise if you're writing about a short story or if you're writing about a book. So it's the same issue. You can't just sort of go off to the side and not address that central part of the assignment. All right, so then I talked about actually already, parenthetical citations are needed and the works cited, and that is needed. MLA, I just wanted to touch on. By this time, you should totally have MLA formatting down. This should be something that you are doing as a matter of course, and I think overall it is going okay, but to make sure as we get into the final paper that this is in place. So again, on your left side of your paper, I don't know if you can see this. Let me try to put it up closer. That's what it should look like. That's what this should look like. Okay, so left side, 1 inch margin, right? Either way, top and side, and then you should have your first and last name. Then next goes the professor's name. After that goes the title of the class. After that goes the date. Okay, so then right here on the right side, the same kind of formatting in a sense, except it's only a 1/2 inch from the top. It is still 1 inch from this side though. And then you have your last name and the page number on each page, all right? So that's what I mean by the MLA formatting. You double space between lines. I think everyone's doing that. You double space between lines. You do not double space between paragraphs. That's it's kind of goofy. Don't do that. It looks kind of goofy. It's not MLA format anyway. So indent each paragraph 5 spaces. Indent each paragraph 5 spaces. To not do that is just not MLA format, and it just doesn't make your paper, especially before you go into like even higher level classes, if you're transferring to a university and everything, you need your paper to look really professional, and just doing these formatting things really helps that. You want your paper to be taken seriously. Seriously, if you're going to Sac State, you're going to UC Berkeley, you're going to Sonoma State, my alma mater, you want your paper to be taken seriously, and if it's not in the correct formatting, it may not be taken as seriously. So just, it's kind of like how you would dress up for a job interview, right? So you want to do the dress up with your formatting, all right? So, all right, so that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to go over, so you will have a chance to revise this paper. It'll be a bit of a quick turnaround, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to revise. All right, thank you.